Michelle, welcome to another episode of An N of One. So this is a podcast where we talk about the individual journeys of applied behavioral scientists. So often we get wrapped up in generalizable things that, work across large groups of people. This is our time to talk about your individual journey. So thanks for joining me today. I'm so happy to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's my pleasure. I love the name of the podcast. So nerdy.
Yeah, if you're gonna name a behavioral science podcast, you got to stick with it's probably for nerds by nerds is like FNBN. I think it's probably our mantra here.
Yeah.
Let's talk about nerdery, right? So, you have been on this behavioral science journey for a while now. You're now in a very senior position, which we're going to talk about at FM Global. But, you sort of started out in my neck of the woods, right? You were at UC Santa Barbara. You were sort of a San Diego, South Cali kind of person like me. Tell me a little bit about sort of, where you sort of started out your journey. Like, you were at, you studied your undergrad at UC Maryland. Did you know going into college, like, hey, psychology is the thing I want to study. This is for me. Like, I'm applying to a psychology program. I know everything about these professors. Like, where did that kind of start for you?
Yeah, wow. All the way back. I guess ever since I was a kid, I have been interested in psychology, but didn't put a name to it, but more into like the social stuff. Like I would read books on like Odd Girl Out. Remember, if you can remember, it was a book about middle school girls getting bullied and cliques and stuff. And I would observe things going on in my life and want to know, why is that happening? Why do people do this? Why are there cliques? What are the social dynamics around me? So I've always been interested in it, but and I took AP psychology, which really solidified, and I got the AP psychology award at the senior awards. I was
So it wasn't just you recognize this, everybody around you is also going, oh yeah, there's Michelle, future psychologist.
Yeah, it was always like the philosophical, in my friend group, or I know philosophy is different, but anyway, I knew I wanted to go into psychology, but my parents immigrated from the Soviet Union, actually, and they wanted like certainty in a career. So I was like, okay, I'll major in psychology, but like, this is the plan at the end. I'm going to become a clinical neuropsychologist. And even in high school, I was very proactive and like job shadowed at some clinics nearby, and like told my parents about like the plan, like this is my degree and this is going to be the career I end up in. So I went to the University of Maryland, actually.
Wait. You're trying to move too fast on from this point, because I want to know, we got breaking news on this podcast. Were you lying to your parents? So meaning, did you go in selling them on clinical psych, but kind of in the back of your mind knowing that you had this social thing that you wanted to do? Or did you really think it was clinical psych for you? You thought, hey, I'm going to go in and become an individual, psychotherapist who works, with one person at a time, et cetera.
Yes, I really did think that that it was going to be clinical psych. I think at the time I had more of an interest in like counseling and personal growth, but I rationalized to myself that I was interested in neuroscience to make it seem more legitimate and scientific to my parents.
And so you get into college, you're like going down this psych path. Where did you start having the first inkling that maybe it wasn't clinical, maybe it was something different?
Not until I had a lot of indecision in college. I volunteered in a clinical psych lab where there was a lot of pressure, and then I kind of found out what it took to get a PhD and just the long path, and explored other options for a while. I was at the advising office probably like every week, asking about.
Good, it's curiosity. We're not going to call it indecision. We're going to say Michelle had a lot of curiosity in college. Because I know you have a degree in Spanish, I'm pretty sure.
Yes. I had a minor in Spanish, and I lived in like an immersive Spanish language house in college at the time. So I was open to all opportunities. I think for a year I was at the advising office and just informational interviewing a lot of people and exploring and talking to people who worked in public policy in DC. University of Maryland was really close to DC, so I was imagining all the alternative paths I might go down. I also signed up for like Maryland business societies and music marketing and would just attend different meetings. I took some intro to speech pathology courses for a semester. I had a lot of AP credits, so I got to explore around the perks of always being a nerd. And so I explored for about a year, and then I read goodness, I forget this book. I read this book that, oh my goodness.
Give me some hints. I might be able to help you.
It was written by a clinical psychologist who works with like individuals in their like young adults and helped them to help find their direction in life. I don't
So
remember.
this is going to be a really, when this goes up on YouTube, someone in the comments is going to start suggesting things that this could actually be. I have no idea, but I do want to go back because I think you buried an actually a really cool tip right there, where you said, hey, because I had all these AP credits, I had a little time to mess around and explore, right? And this is a really critical part for applied behavioral scientists, right? Because if you can make early progress, right? If you can show business results early on to somebody, then it buys you a little goodwill to be able to muck around to find the next thing, right? One of the things I feel like we hear a lot from guests is, they're the kind of people who just kind of get a little bit ahead so that there's that room to play. There's always that permission space for the slack because, with science, you never really know what's going to work and what's not. So you need to budget in this kind of variable way. So getting a little bit ahead, whether that's AP credits in high school or, I graduated from Swarthmore in 3 years. I took the max load of credits every summer, every winter, I was just on it, right? Because it was expensive. But if you kind of rush ahead a little bit, then it gives you some room to like be wrong, which is one of the hallmarks of science, right? If you can't be wrong, you can't do science. So I love this, that you're like into college, you've bought a little goodwill, so now you can sort of explore a little bit. Where did it start to materialize for you? You read this clinical book.
Read this book that I don't remember the name of, but I read the book and I realized I would love to do what this author is doing, helping people with their personal growth and their goals and overcome these like persistent patterns in their life. And there was a line where she was helping somebody that she was counseling, and she said it was like that famous quote, like, or the time will pass anyway. Which convinced me that even though a PhD would take a long time, the time is going to pass anyway, and that's the goal I want to have at the end, is to help people. And so it got me back on the track to go into clinical psychology, but this time with more of a counseling angle. And I know I'm not doing that now. So anyway.
That's all right. We don't jump ahead in the story.
Yeah.
You're revealing the cliffhanger ending here. But that, all psychologists and all people, we go through pivots and things. And I think, applied behavioral science, you are younger than I, but it still wasn't a large mainstream field when you were, nobody was in college in 2012 going like, hey man, Michelle, you should really be an applied behavioral scientist at Weight Watchers, right? That wasn't like, so
Yeah.
inevitable pivoting. So you're like back on this counseling sort of track. You're about to graduate, and then you end up at UC Santa Barbara, right?
Yeah. So I was doing an honors thesis to make me more competitive for PhD programs. And as part of the honors program, I took a motivation science seminar with Arya Kruglansky. And like, I was like, this is my thing. I love this. Yeah, like just the discussions. It was a graduate level seminar with just the honors thesis folks. And like, I loved going to that class. It was my jam. Arya is brilliant. And yeah, it was a trip to his office hours. I came to his office hours and I said, I think these topics are so applicable to everything in society. And for those of you watching this who are not familiar, it would be, you know, what mindsets are optimal for reaching long-term goals, and just research on priming and decision making. And I thought it was so applicable to everyday life, and so many things, it could explain so many things happening in society. And I love that explainability, and I felt empowered. And so I went to his office hours and asked what careers could one do in social psychology and motivation science. And he said, oh, you should be a professor and not a psychologist. Being a professor is more interesting. And so
Really, an academic told you should become an academic? I'm shocked.
yeah.
I think this is how they justify the choice, is they just recruit, right? It's like, hey, if I can get everybody else to do it, then I'm not the crazy one.
Yeah, exactly. There's a whole psychology to academia. Um, but yes, after I walked out of office hours, I changed my mind from being a clinical psychologist to wanting to become a social psychologist. And that was in like the second half of my senior year of undergrad.
Whoa, right at
Yeah,
the end.
yeah. But I had always been planning to take that time off to get that extra research that's required before you go into graduate school. Um, and luckily, and so Aria connected me to Tori Higgins at the Higgins Lab at Columbia University, and I volunteered as a research assistant there because it was very hard to get a paid research manager position at the time, and I lived at home. And anyway, um, that was a lot of interesting research on motivational theory and regulatory focus theory and promotion, prevention mindsets. I was doing field experiments with Mark Conley, who was a graduate student there and is now currently a professor at, I believe, the Stockholm School of Economics. But anyway, we were doing field experiments and applying, priming people into different regulatory mindsets. And then from there, I went to UCSB.
Wait, I like that. You're like, da 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 da. And then I went to UCSB. Let's shrink that down. So you're working in Tori's lab up in New York and Columbia.
Yes.
Did it feel right? Were you like, yes, this is the right thing? Did it feel like, you know, what felt good? What felt maybe not the right path?
I think it wasn't it wasn't really representative of what it was. What I knew it what the experience wasn't going to be very representative of what it would be like to fully be a grad student, because it was merely a part-time opportunity, and I was just viewing it as something to pad my resume. I really, so I suppose, and I wasn't regularly attending lab meetings at the time because Tori wanted to keep it very intimate. So I wasn't getting that immersion and really like the what's in it for me out of it, besides like being able to say that I worked in Tori's lab. It was
Academia, where they're more than happy to take your work product, but give you absolutely nothing back.
yeah,
So
yeah.
you weren't, you got some sense of it, but you had this consciousness that it wasn't the thing, but you still felt like grad school was that you were sort of headed in the right direction.
Yeah, I thought so. I really enjoyed conversing with professors as I was emailing them. Like I would get very excited when reaching out and asking if professors were accepting graduate students, and I would have a lot of thoughts of research that I could contribute to their programs, and when they would reply back, I'd get very excited.
And was this in mentorship with somebody, or you were just like making the bets?
I I talked to like a friend from University of Maryland who had applied to clinical programs and just asked her for her advice. And then she said you should. I kind of talked to her and also had an intuition to personalize my application process as much as possible. I think that she had recommended to apply to graduate students, but no, I did it by myself.
So you're out there, you're like, I could do this work in this lab, I could do this, when it's time for me to go, I knew nothing about grad school. So it was time for me to go to grad school. Barry Schwartz and Andrew Ward sat down and basically just said, well, who's crazy enough to take on Matt Wallard? And that was the list of people. The list of people was like, who had research interests that aligned with mine and could put up with the fact that I'm insane. And that was how we got to the place. So I'm always fascinated how people sort of, come to this place where they're choosing why UCSB, like why Santa Barbara, like what sort of, what helped you end up there? Were there other options? Like what were the other forks in the road that you didn't take?
So I was accepted into 4 programs, UC Santa Barbara, UPitt with Ed Orheck, Maryland with Ari Kruglansky, and Stony Brook with Antonio Freitas, with the means ends questionnaire. But I really loved the applied nature of David Sherman's work. Well, it was very theoretical too, but
Well, but if we think of it as a spectrum, even within academia, there's, even if in the wider world, all of academia is over here on this side, even within academia, there's a spectrum. And so, David's sort of on the more applied end of that spectrum for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that.
And that was really the decision maker for you, was like, hey, there's, something about David's work that's lighting me up, that's helping me see where this could be applied in the world. And that's attractive.
Yeah, it was like a really tough decision between David, Ed, and Aria. I also wanted like a change of scenery, and I just thought that I'd be at the beach all the time at Santa Barbara.
As a grad student, yeah, for sure. You'll just hang out at the beach all the time. For those listening, that's not how grad life works.
No, that wasn't
So you arrive at UCSB, sort of fresh faced. You're coming off of Tori's lab. You arrive on the West Coast. How was grad school for you?
It had its ups and downs.
There's a lot in that. It's a very loaded. Tell me. Well, this is the N of 1, right? This is your story. Tell me a little bit about some of the ups. What did you love about grad school? What did you love about academia? Like, what really felt good for you?
I think like I really loved the first year the most. It felt it was everything I thought it would be in the first year. It was very like low stakes and not a lot of pressure being put on me. It was more time to explore, and I loved attending the interesting courses and the graduate seminars, and how personal the professors would make it, or we'd have like wine and cheese like during a seminar. And like I'd love to attend, we had this gathering called social, like social for social psychologists at different professors' homes, like in Santa Barbara. Like it was kind of bougie in the beginning. My husband or boyfriend at the time moved to the West Coast, and he was living in Pasadena. So I loved to like go to Pasadena over the weekends and be on the West Coast. But what else did I loved I already said the seminars, but the guest speakers that we would have and just the general talks going on in the department. For example, we had some very interesting cognitive, no, I forget what it was. Yeah, cognitive psychologists maybe talk about the sensory experience of fine dining and like how it's being implemented in different restaurants, and it would get catered.
So fitting in with your bougie theme.
Yeah.
There's some bougie Santa Barbara food and wine. All right.
Yeah,
But then,
I love the intellectual aspect and also mentoring research assistants. I loved to mentor, and I formed very close relationships with my research assistants.
That's so awesome. And then, right, you said, okay, there are some lows. You said after the first year, it kind of took a turn for you. I'm betting the word pressure is going to come up because you've mentioned how year one was low pressure and that felt good. Leads me to
Yeah,
believe that maybe higher pressure stakes were not as good. Talk to me a little bit about, as you advanced in your career, why academia felt like not the right thing.
I think, well, for those of you who have seen me on LinkedIn, balance is very important in my life. And I think that like having work-life balance and taking time off makes you more productive. And I would try to enforce my boundaries, or at least like not work on the weekends, but I felt like the system and my advisor were encroaching on my boundaries. And I always felt guilty for not doing more and not working. Even when I would try to like maintain a consistent schedule, sometimes I would get texts over the weekends, or I would get like questions on Monday if I had seen emails that came in over the weekend. Um, I would also get berated for like making a small mistakes, or like missing some minor detail when it, in the big picture, I think that it's not like surgery, like I never took sick days because I was worried about getting like coverage for like um TAing a class. Like I just like wasn't taking care of myself. Um, and also just the nature of the work. Like I think my mind, I like to have cognitive closure. And so sometimes and it's up to me to really figure out how to turn it off. But with like these long, unending projects, it would be very hard for my mind to turn off because I'd always be trying to figure it out.
Yeah. There's
Yeah.
in tech, we have this notion of a sprint that has like sort of pervaded
Yeah.
other parts of business, which is a very healthy psychological, this sort of notion of chunking, this notion of sort of getting into a thing. Academia doesn't really have that. It's just one endless, it's not even a marathon because there's no end to it. It's just, keep running at some rather extreme pace forever, right? Or at least nebulously into the future until maybe you get tenure, and even after tenure, maybe. And so, if you need that sort of chunking mechanism, academia can be a really tough place to get some of those. And did you know, realize this pretty quick? Because unlike we PhD dropouts over here, you finished, right?
Yeah.
So did you sort of know this, but grit your teeth and bear it, knowing that you weren't going to go into academia? Were you telling that to other people, right? Were you telling your advisor, hey, I'm not going into academia. I'm not going on the job market. Like, how did this sort of manifest for you?
Yeah, so I initially thought in my third year, this is when I had a very bad experience on a graduate student researcher grant for this like high stakes grant, and I made like a small mistake with a longitudinal survey. I accidentally included the debriefing in one of the surveys before it was, but like anyway, it was getting reviewed by everyone on the team, but and got blamed for the mistake, and it was just like a culmination. I abruptly decided that I wanted to leave academia, and that was in the fall of my third year, and then over winter break, I spoke to family and friends and just mentors and was thinking it over, and then when I came back, I started to come up with a strategy of how I could tell my advisor. It felt like a huge relief um, to have come to this decision, and to be at the point where I was ready to tell my advisor, because and I was a little nervous about that, but many students at UC Santa Barbara had transitioned to industry, and they were starting to become a little more supportive of it. We even had like a guest panel of a few people who had gone on to work at Meta and like Google come and talk to us. So I was like, okay, I have a support system. They've all done it. And like, now I only have to stay here for 5 years instead of 6. So it's great. So, um, I with the help of my fiance and my therapist, we came up with like a plan for how to tell my advisor, and he was supportive. I think he kind of like knew it was coming, or I sent like an email to foreshadow that I was going to tell him, to give him some time to get ready for me to tell him. And I just tried to like maintain my boundaries and not ask for permission to leave, or like not ask for things, but rather say like, this is the decision I've made and I need to like graduate as soon as is feasible, like while also meeting the criteria of the program, but like this is what needs to happen so that I can get experience to prepare for industry. And basically I'm going to like, you know, continuing to work on these random manuscripts is not in service of my goals. So like I'm going to finish my dissertation and do the needs of the
GTFO.
program. Yeah, basically, I was like, this is what's happening.
Which is, for those who have not been in academia,
Yeah.
it's difficult to
Ooh.
grasp how hard of a conversation that is. You're like, I'm gonna take a water and a break, because it's just, even, now that was, 8 years ago, whatever it was. Like, it's a really fraught conversation with somebody who, it's much different than quitting a job, which I think is something a lot of people compare it to. But I'm like, no, it's not. That's not the same thing, man.
No.
Was this before or after PBS? Like, where does this fit sort of chronologically? Like, had you had exposure to industry that would helping you along here, or was it like I made the decision and then I went and got that industry exposure that I felt like I needed? I mean, first of
It
all,
was
I'm jealous because, you know, there was nobody from Meta coming when I was, when I was reaching the decision point you're at, 10 years earlier. There's nobody from Meta being like, hey, there's a golden world out here. There's a whole job path that you could go on. It was academia or the abyss. And so, you choose the abyss. Uh, uh, no. So PBS, before, after, like, have you had some industry experience? Like, how does this manifest?
No, I was always very like proactive. Like once I find the goal, I'm gonna go all in on that. So I was all in on academia, and then PBS came after. After that, I was like, I'm gonna do everything I need to do to proactively set myself up for industry.
Got it. And so while finishing your dissertation, you're
Yeah,
starting to have these experiences elsewhere where you can, they're setting yourself up for industry.
yeah.
Talk to me about that. You're in your first, you were doing quant at PBS, right?
Yes, so that was a collaboration between PBS and UC Santa Barbara. It was me tailoring my experiences a little bit. So PBS, there's a climate professor, Lisa Lombrioni at UC Santa Barbara, who previously worked at PBS. And so they hired her on a grant to experiment with their different educational programs. And so I was one of the researchers on her team at
So you're
UC.
getting exposed to, like, you know, outside of academia for the first time. What did that feel like? How did it feel?
It it felt good. I really it felt more like a job. Um, I was on this team with all academics still, who we were going to deliver our final product to PBS, but it felt more like a job. We met weekly. I was responsible for presenting updates and reports on the data that I had analyzed. Um, and it was more short-term chunks of work. At the end, we directly communicated with the PBS team and delivered a presentation of our findings of piloting their different types of educational programs on a survey sample. And I observed that a lot of work went into the report out, like the visuals of it, and much more than occurs in academia. Um,
Yeah, academic. I really love showing people outside of academia the graphs that we put in, like, Nature, where, like, you are the premier place here is this graph that I made in Excel, right? It has like a white bar and a gray bar. There is no, right? Like,
Yeah.
it is amazing how little effort we put into communicating something that took years and years and years of study and work. And we're like, and now the ugliest bar chart you've ever seen.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you got a sense of both that kind of closure, that chunking, that timing, that sort of more
Yes.
job-like rhythm, which is very different than academia, this sort of like
Yeah.
endless running into nowhere sort of thing. And you get a sense that like, hey, presentation matters. Like how we tell this story is,
Yes.
is part of what's happening.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then you graduate and
Well, I also worked at Sea Change Institute, which was a similar kind of middle of the, like, not fully in an organization, doing surveys for different, it was a consultancy with all behavioral scientists, and we would write reports and do surveys. And so kind of similar deal to PBS. And then I graduate. Well, no. Then I actually did an internship at Weight Watchers, which I removed from my LinkedIn to look more senior on my last job cycle, but internship that turned into a job. So I'll talk about the whole experience at Weight Watchers.
do it. Like, all right. So you're not in college, you have not yet graduated, but
Right.
like you're gonna go do an internship at Weight Watchers. Like, who are you talking? This is in the Julie era. Like, tell me about like
Yes.
how this sort of like came about. I like that
Yeah.
I've now made it a term, the Julie era.
It is an era. So I didn't have any connections at Weight Watchers. I just sent my cover letter and resume, and I really got hit it off with Julie in the interview. She also went to UMD. We both like loved Aria Kruglansky and had like nerded out. We had the same theoretical interests, so I
I
got the
feel the
job.
need to do audio subtitles here. Julie here is Julie O'Brien, the former
Yeah.
head of behavioral science at Weight Watchers, US Bank, and now running a brand new company. As she's left US Bank, but one of the early heads of behavioral science out there in industry at Weight Watchers in the sort of 2000s, late 2000 teens and early 20s.
Yeah, a true visionary and pioneer. Yeah, so we really hit it off. I got the internship, and learned so much in a short period of time. Like, I think, I don't know, I don't know if I could say this, but like the amount I learned in the internship with Julie is like, it feels equivalent to how much I've learned in like a year, like after that, just at a slower pace. But that was like a lot of learning in just a few weeks, being really thrown into the fire. Um, so,
So wait, you reach out to Julie with a
oh
resume
yeah.
and a cover letter and pitch her on, hey, I really want to come work with you.
I we just had interesting discussions on the interview, like just applying.
But what did you think what were you interviewing for? Right? Like,
Um, well, when I saw the position, it looked like my dream role. It was like applying behavioral concepts like motivation and self-control to health goals and weight loss, and fitness goals. And I've always been a motivation science nerd. And like personal health and wellness, it has always been very important to me. And I've also kind of, like as a woman, have, had, like the struggles with like weight, like, and that whole thing. So it felt very personally relevant and like something that I thought about a lot and was always interested in, like the research that applies to it. Um, and so the position, it looked like my dream position because I would get to research these topics and like apply psychology concepts to the product vision. It seemed like a position where I would get to do a variety of things, including research and like teaching, and it seemed like a less research only and research heavy position. I was interested that it seemed very that it really cared about the psychology subject matter expertise, as opposed to maybe just a UX researcher position, which is mostly focused on your research methods and chops, and like not as much like about your psychology interests.
You didn't want to just do a million interviews a day and then
Yeah.
got it. And so you're kind of ABD, you're working on your dissertation while you're working at Weight Watchers?
So that was a summer internship, and I had planned to graduate with my dissertation, come take a pause, come back to it in the fall, and then defend by December. So I actually took a pause from my dissertation during the internship, but was able to finish writing it and defend in September.
Wow, that's a busy summer. And then this internship turns into a job, and you work with Julie.
Yes. Well, no, I worked for Stephen Gates because curveball. Julie got the opportunity at US Bank just a mere few weeks into my internship. And so so that was a challenge a little bit, because it kind of felt like a lot of teams were relying on Julie, and she was like in the middle of implementing all these new initiatives and projects, and I was very junior, but felt like I had to be the expert or kind of take on Julie's role. Not that anyone expected that of me. I guess I was placing pressure on myself. But that transition was a little bit challenging, but I ended up reporting to Stephen Gates, who is a design leader, who's fantastic. He was a great manager and like advocated for me and helped me negotiate my salary up, and has just like was a super strong advocate. And it was interesting for the first time reporting to someone who doesn't have any overlapping expertise, and
Talk about
having
that.
to,
Push on that a little bit. What was it like to sort of work with somebody who, I want to go to two things, because I also want to talk about the like punching above your weight, trying to fill big shoes kind of part, because I think that's also important. But talk about reporting to a design leader, and how did you help him understand behavioral science? How did you negotiate sort of this conversation? So Julie calls you in a meeting and is like, JK, Michelle, I'm off to
yeah,
US Bank. Bye. And
yeah.
then you and Steve are in your first meeting, and what happens?
So, luckily there was one other behavioral scientist, Billy Rothwell. And, yeah, it was interesting with Stephen because he just gave us a lot of freedom and autonomy and was like, what do you guys think we should do? Or like, what do you want to do? And I wasn't used to that, to have that autonomy and ownership. And like, it felt weird to not have a gut check of everything I was proposing, or be able to, yeah, it just felt weird to like be the most expert social scientist at the company with Billy. So we started to talk to different stakeholders and identified an interest in some research on the effects of different Weight Watchers community groups, and how like we had virtual communities and our in-person workshops. And I forget, we had virtual coaching, and people were interested in like the impact of those groups on people's health behaviors and their sense of well-being and like feeling socially supported. So basically we did so kind of to sum it all up, it felt weird to have more of a sense of ownership and to have to be the expert, and to like propose projects rather than being told what to do.
Mm-hmm.
But it was nice to have the support of another behavioral scientist, and not to have pressure from Stephen, to give us the time to explore and like identify a need.
Yeah, I mean, that one of the things that we hear, consistently from people is that they had some early career opportunity where they got maybe a step above where they, I came out of grad school as the head of product at a startup. Like, they had some elevated responsibility early on that then sort of forced them into this, like, okay, well, how am I going to make applied behavioral science relevant in the business context? And that has been formative for a lot of folks.
Yeah, even more so at FM, but we won't skip, we could skip
Well, no,
ahead.
let's talk about FM. So you're at Weight Watchers. You're not there all that long. You're only there about a year. And
Yeah,
then you move over to FM Global, where you've been for almost 2 years at this point, I think.
yes.
So talk to me about that transition, right? So Julie goes, right? Like, you're reporting to Steven, you're like, making lemonades out of lemons, punching above your weight, trying to find places where people are really interested, and you're bringing business value.
Yeah.
What made you decide, to go elsewhere and to look elsewhere and to be elsewhere, and sort of how did that transition work for you?
Well, the behavioral science team was laid off.
And talk to me about that. Like,
Yeah,
what did almost everybody has gone through a layoff at some point, right? What was that like for you?
it was it was really hard. It kind of was I never it was kind of like a financial wake-up call and a call to like start being I'm glad that it happened when it did, because I feel like we've just it's a good thing to happen early on in one's career rather than later. I feel like it was a wake-up call. Financially, also career-wise, to just be more know that this is a possibility, and I guess unfortunately not to feel too secure. Um, but
Well, earlier you talked about your tendency to be all in. I was all in on academia, and then when I figured out the right thing was industry, I was all in on industry. And so I can understand being all in on your job. And it sounds like you've learned a little bit that what you're really all in on is applied behavioral science, right?
yeah,
And that might happen at different companies, and it's important to keep your head up and on the swivel about what other opportunities are out there and where the community and sort of the industry is going, and staying up to date, sort of. It can be very easy to get lost in the nuances of a particular company, right? And then
yes,
to lose sight of, like, oh no, there's this larger field with with new ways of integrating, and it's done differently, different places, and potentially being part of larger communities. I know community has been a big thing for you.
yeah.
And so you get laid off from Weight Watchers, you have your oh shit moment. Like, were you did it feel like, were you like, I'm looking at quant jobs, I'm looking at qual jobs? Like, where did it felt like your natural next step, having come out of Weight Watchers?
I cast a super wide net and tailored my resume and cover letter and interview style across quantitative UX research, market research, consumer insights, behavioral science. I always preferred to have a more behavioral sciencey position to like that was interested in my subject matter background, but I just needed a job ASAP. Uh, we live in Rhode Island.
So wait, so let's inhabit some alternative futures, right? Anybody that knows me knows I love counterfactual thinking. Like, if it wasn't FM Global, as you're going through that search, did you see any jobs that you were like, oh yeah, like that just calls to me, like I would kill to get that job? Like, were there ones out there that you really saw that you loved or were really interested in?
Yeah, I think probably a behavioral scientist position at Fidelity, to, to advise on like the psychology of saving money and help people reach their goals with that, and like the balance of doing research and the subject matter expertise and trainings. And having gone through my first layoff, I became very passionate about financial wellness. So yeah, I there weren't really, then there was another position at what's it called, Blue Cross Blue Shield, but the salary range was like about half of, it was much lower than what I was looking for. So
Got it. Okay. So, I mean, and that does happen sometimes, right? There are organizations, applied behavioral science can be one of those things that's very hard to value. I often tell organizations, try and think of your most senior data person, and you're probably paying them about the same as, if you have a chief data officer, your chief behavioral officer probably makes about the same thing. But it's hard for companies. I vividly remember, insert large insurance company here, gave me a call at one point, and they were like, "We know we don't want you. You're too senior for us, but like, we're hoping we'll give you a little bit of help." This was maybe like 5 or so years ago. And I talked to them for an hour about like what I thought they should put in the JD and how they should interview and all of the things. And then they sent me back. First of all, they sent me the JD, and the first bullet point was 10 years of insurance experience, and the second bullet point was 10 years of behavioral science experience. And I was like, well, that's nobody. Great. So that's not going to work. And then they sent me the salary range, and it was like, I don't know, 110 or something. And I was like, and the fact that you're trying to pay anybody with 10 years of specialty experience across 2 different industries $110,000 in like Chicago is probably not a great idea.
Yeah.
People just have really different expectations for what a scientist does.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's pretty
And
crazy.
and then you came to FM, right, as sort of a behavioral scientist and user researcher, which was relatively new for them, I think.
Yes, yes. So I actually, I think it's pretty funny. I was casting a wide net. I applying to whatever LinkedIn recommended, and I applied to be a UX research manager, not like really reading into the description too much, but I actually had applied for like my manager's position. To manage like 14 UX, like qualitative researchers with a visual design background, not like the typical academic to UX pipeline. And I was like, I got on the call with the hiring manager. I think I caught her attention because the company's based in Rhode Island and I live in Rhode Island. And I was like, oh, I'm definitely not qualified for this position because I like have never done qualitative research and don't know any of these methods. So I probably can't manage 14 of these people.
But I really appreciate you interviewing me.
Yeah. But I gave her my pitch and told her about my background in psychology, and she was very interested and created a new position for me and slotted me in as a UX researcher.
That's fantastic. So you had a chance to sort of bring your quant to what was a primarily qual designy sort of team. How was that? Was it oil and water? You're speaking a
Yeah.
language and they're going, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yes, and it hasn't really been very quanty to this date. It has mostly been influencing with and applying behavioral science rather than conducting science. And evolve like getting us to a place eventually where we hope to have quantitative research, but like very elementary. I've been doing descriptive stats, basic advising on construct measures, advising on metrics. And I think that's been really helpful to the team. But yes, it is a very designy team.
That's awesome. So you've actually got to teach behavioral science a lot of the time, which is really, we talk about, punching above your weight in the career progression, right? Like that's where you want to go. You want to get to a place where you're managing and teaching and sort of rather than a high level IC, you're doing those more leadershipy things. So for someone who crash lands in a company that doesn't necessarily have the discipline all thought out, what do you think makes it all work? I know that you do a lot of like workshops and lunch and learns and sort of try and cast a wide net within FM Global about sort of how do you educate? How do you approach this task of sort of educating people into a discipline that may not be totally native to them?
I have seeking the feedback of my teammates really in like what do they want to learn, and always getting their feedback on deliverables or how I might teach something, or just not rushing and taking a while to observe what skills might be needed on my team and then finding an opportunity to propose a workshop to fill a gap. So for example, let's see. Well, I would say to always, of course, I started off with a kind of a road show to evangelize behavioral science and because a lot of people don't know what it was. So starting off with a roadshow to introduce it and explain the value and like the process and how I approach problems and why is it relevant to this particular company versus like an obviously behavioral science company, like some company that's trying to help people lose
Like Weight
weight.
Watchers.
Simple. Yeah, like Weight Watchers, it was a lot easier to just start applying it and to get people to see the relevance. But I think at FM, people can get very deep into the details of design and it gets very technical with engineering, consultant engineering, and it's also not like obvious what exactly we're trying to change in people. It's more like in the context of a digital transformation and transitioning the technology that employees are using to a new platform, which is a behavior change. But I had to spend a lot of time like getting people to see why it's relevant.
And so talk to me about that, talk to me about that roadshow. Like, what are the elements of a good roadshow? What do you, is this 30 minutes? Is it 10 minutes? Are you trying to do one-on-one meetings? Are you doing lunch? Like, how do you sort of take that roadshow to market inside of a company?
I think um, I proposed it to my manager and she was really interested. I think a lot of people are interested if there's support for it. A lot of people were interested in psychology and behavioral science and thought it was a cool new thing. So it kind of felt like it was like a learning and development opportunity for the team to kind of augment people's day to day. And so, but just my strategy in presenting these talks is to make it very interactive and relevant and try to put it into the context of people's work because sometimes people can have trouble seeing where the theory or an abstract concept applies. So making it very relevant, leveraging tools like Mural to make it interactive and getting people to think of personal examples where things are applying in their own life.
Got it. So interactive, right? There's some edutainment value to this.
Yeah,
Harking back
entertainment
early to your
value.
career, packaging matters, PBS, packaging matters, right?
Yes.
So there's it's a spoonful of sugar, helps the medicine go down. So interactive, visually appealing, lots of practical examples that are connected both to their individual life and to whatever business you're in, right? Really making it relevant to, whether it's FM Global or anywhere else, helping them see. Because your point, a lot of companies grapple with not really seeing themselves as behavioral in nature, right? We're a tech company, even someplace that from the outside, Google changes behavior all the time. But if you're an engineer in Google, you're not really thinking about like, yes, here's my behavior changing technology that I'm building, right? And so that can absolutely be a challenge. So as you one of the things that you mentioned, you did this roadshow, you got some excitement, some strong promoting pressure. How do you select what trainings to do next, right? How do you decide like where the right gaps are, because there's a plethora of skills that you potentially could teach people. Like, how do you decide where to target next and who to target next?
Yeah. So I think when I first started my position, I had a bunch of workshops up my sleeve that I was like, I know that like I have to teach all of this as a foundation to get us all on a shared reality. So I had a few topics that I like knew I had to teach, like what is behavioral science? What's the intention action gap? Like what are a few ways that humans work? But after that, I was like, okay, I don't know what to do now. So I actually brainstormed with ChatGPT for some help on like how do I come up with an approach. And I found out that I came across like the idea of a training needs assessment, which is just a practice that educators use to question like what skills are where are the skill gaps on the team, like what skills are needed, who is this training for, how will it be delivered, and so I started to do like informational like discovery interviews with different people on my team to I narrowed in on a topic, stakeholder management, because a few teams had requested this of me, like that they would like to learn more. And then I had a bunch of one-on-ones with people on my team to just talk about like the challenges that our team has had and like where managers feel like things could be improved, like empathizing, like active listening, and like just more effective communication, which has helped me discover what skills needed to be developed on my team that could be informed with behavioral science.
Got it. And I love that you're really hampering in on that, conversation matters, right? It's not you could get some things from a survey and get some things from observation, but at the end of the day, you have to talk to people. And if you're not ready and confident and comfortable to talk to people, it's going to be tough for you. What's next for Michelle? FM goes away tomorrow, you get laid off. What is exciting to you in the wider world of opportunities around behavioral science right now?
Yeah, I feel like I think about this and it feels almost like there are a lot of opportunities, but it's a little challenging because it doesn't seem like there's a clear path anymore of where to go. I am really interested in, I mean, this is not fleshed out yet, but just things I'm passionate about and interested in are organizational culture and employee well-being. That's kind of new, particularly where behavioral science and culture visioning will be helpful as AI becomes more integrated into workplaces and like navigating people through that change. So I think that feels like a newer area of interest to me to explore org psych a little bit. But
Yeah,
I don't
it was interesting to me when we came to Frog. I think Frog sort of in their mind, we thought we would do a lot of external design similar to what we've done before, the Disney Magic Band, et cetera. And about half of the projects that came in tagged behavioral science were internal behavior change. They were some company trying to figure out, how do I get my own people to do a thing, right? And sometimes that's about, more inclusive behavior. Sometimes that's about, sort of moving projects faster. Sometimes it's about adopting a new technology. But there's so many behavior changes that happen internal to an organization. People like Richard Rose now, et cetera, are like, really going after this space as behavioral scientists. So Michelle, the next stop might be a more internal, and in some ways you're in a very internal facing role now.
Exactly. Yeah. Which I think has like made me so interested in it. Just seeing the mechanics of how organizations work and why there might be certain cultural barriers and I think culture can often impede, like a non-innovative culture, bureaucracy, has been shown in research published in HBR to be like the #1 barrier to innovation. But how do you even begin to tackle these challenges? And then work-life balance, employee well-being. I'm super passionate about that. I'm super passionate about like great managers. I think great managers can really make or break the job. And I don't know exactly what job title I would look for, but just
sounds like the next chief people officer might be the next chief behavioral officer. I hear you.
Yeah,
Michelle,
sure.
thanks so much for coming and spending some time with me. I really appreciate hearing about your journey and all the sort of twists and turns and sharing some tips with folks. Behavioral science is still a very early nascent field in many ways, even though we're a lot farther than we used to be 15 years ago. It's still a place where people need to hear individual stories. And thank you for sharing ours.
Thank you, Matt. Really appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Talk soon.
Okay.